Hello friends. In my recent update video, I mentioned that I'm currently looking for people to join me for a Trials of Osiris team in Destiny 2. This video is going to cover the details of what I'm looking for. Recently, I've been doing most of my Trials matches with random LFG groups. Some groups are great, other groups not so much. What I've noticed is that regardless of the skill of the individuals, LFG groups suffer from one common problem: we don't have solid team chemistry. My primary goal in forming a dedicated Trials team is to have a group of people who are interested in practicing to improve together. It's worth noting that my inspiration for this goal is largely based on my experiences in Forerunner conflict, competing in Halo 4. My favorite memories from those days include how I was able to make significant jumps in my personal skill level, and also how as a team, we were able to perform at a level above the sum of our individual skills, by leveraging teamwork and communication. Now I'm trying to recreate that experience in Destiny. Before we get into the details of what I'm looking for in teammates, I want to discuss my perspective on the different skill tiers in arena shooters. I suspect that these skill bands exist in other FPS games, but since my competitive experience is primarily based in Halo with a little exposure to the Destiny scene, I don't want to claim these skill tiers and the characteristics are universal. Starting at the low end, we'll call this tier the casual gamers. This skill tier is characterized by people with a negative KD. These players likely have mechanical issues with aiming and general endgame awareness. To be blunt, they just aren't very good, and often they don't mind not being very good. They are just playing to have fun. Personally, I don't mind playing with people in the skill tier, but if I know I'm going to be playing with people in the skill tier, I usually adjust my playstyle to be more welcoming to these players. For me, that means reducing callouts to a minimum level, and often holding off topic conversations while we play the game. The goal of these play sessions is to have a good time with each other. We'll call the next tier the dedicated gamers. This skill tier is primarily characterized by players with a positive KD and the I can hold my own mentality. These players are able to aim and have reasonable in-game awareness. Most players in this tier can easily transfer their knowledge and skills to other arena shooters with minimal effort, since the core mechanics of an arena shooter are generally the same across multiple titles. Players in this tier are going to play to win, but they aren't yet capable of solo carrying a squad to victory without competitive allies. To support their allies, these players are able to make basic callouts, but generally don't elevate their teammates significantly. When I assess myself in Destiny 2, this is the tier I usually play in. I'm able to go positive most games, but I don't know enough about the game to effectively elevate my teammates or carry my team to victory. Since the previous tier is the dedicated gamers, we'll call the next tier the obsessed gamers. This tier is characterized by players who have very high stats. It's not unusual for players in the skill tier to have a 2.0 KD or higher. These players are extremely good at the mechanics for a specific game and can often carry their team to victory without relying on competent teammates. These are the players you might think of when you imagine somebody who is good at a specific game. In a team environment, these players are very proficient at giving retroactive callouts, but when in combat, they must choose between holding their own or giving a quality callout to their allies. This is the pinnacle skill tier for solo players. To advance to a higher tier, a player in the obsessed gamer tier needs to work on their ability to elevate their teammates. In Destiny 2, when I focus up, I can sometimes achieve this skill tier, but I don't feel like I'm at the point in Destiny 2 where I can reliably hit it. Unlike the previous tiers, playing with people in this tier is sometimes frustrating for me. When I'm trying to play at my best, I don't want to be playing with a bunch of people who like going solo. My time playing at a high level in Halo 4 trained me to rely on my teammates, and players in this tier aren't the type of teammates that I like having. I'd rather play with a team of lower skilled players who are better teammates than a squad of high tier players who struggle to be good allies. We'll call this next penultimate tier the expert gamers. Players in this tier have solid stats, and if you challenge them in a 1v1, they will be good. The distinction between the previous tier and this tier is that players in the expert tier make the choice to prioritize elevating their team over being perfect individual players. It is often the case that players in this tier have potentially lower KD ratios than players in the previous obsessed gamer tier, because players in this tier don't focus on their KD. They focus on doing what is best for the team, even if it means they would look statistically worse. As an example, these players often have very high assist counts because they are making callouts before and during an engagement, which allows their allies to come in and steal their kill. Destiny is not a very objective-based game, but in Halo, players in this tier are often very good objective players. This is not to be confused with the nominally called objective player, who blindly pursues the objective and frequently dies, putting their team in a bad position. For a player in the obsessed tier to make the transition to the expert tier, they need to master the ability to give callouts during engagements without sacrificing their ability to hold their own. This skill requires the mental dexterity to be able to communicate while maintaining solid mechanics. Luckily, despite being a difficult skill to acquire, it is a skill that can be practiced. In my Halo 4 Prime, this is the tier I would frequently play at. My favorite memories of playing Halo are playing with a squad of expert tier players and observing and participating in the cacophony of callouts. We'll call the final tier the pro tier. The distinction between the expert tier and the pro tier is that players in the expert tier generally restrict their callouts to positional information. In contrast, a pro tier player is also able to deliver strategic callouts without compromising the flow of positional information. It is easy for an expert tier player to make chatty callouts about their actions and intentions. However, a pro tier player is able to understand how to fill gaps of silence with strategic callouts while not compromising the flow of positional information. My description and understanding of this tier is admittedly fuzzy. I have played with people who operate at this level, but I don't think I've ever mastered this skill, which makes it difficult for me to effectively describe this tier. Now for a deeper dive into the different levels of callouts and what makes pro tier players so good. The distinction between positional callouts and strategic callouts is both the timing and the content. A standard callout that most players can make is a positional callout. These callouts focus on where the opponent is and sometimes where the player themselves is, or more often, where the player themselves has died. In contrast, a strategic callout is about intentions. For example, a strategic callout would be something like pushing alpha. Players in the expert tier are generally able to make these strategic callouts, but the reason why they don't qualify as pro tier players is because when an expert tier player makes these callouts, they overcompensate and create chatty callouts that obscure positional information. It is actively harmful to the team if player A is trying to make a callout like enemy is pushing Bravo, but their callout is obscured by player B trying to make a strategic callout like I'm pushing Alpha. It is much more important for the team to know that the enemy is pushing Bravo, and only secondary for player B's allies to know that player B is making a push on Alpha. A key characteristic of pro tier players is that when they make strategic callouts, it is during silence, and not while their allies are trying to communicate positional information to the rest of the squad. In addition to not obscuring allies' callouts, a pro tier player is also able to deliver strategic callouts in advance such that their allies can respond. As an example, player A might say, I'm pushing Alpha, and then before they make the move, they give their allies a second to respond. Player B might then reject the push saying something like, don't push yet, I'm not in a position to cover you, or they could respond indicating that they are ready, as in, I'm pushing with you from the cave. The key characteristic of pro tier players, and specifically pro tier teams, is that they're able to move together. When players in the expert tier are attempting to learn this skill, they often struggle to provide sufficient amount of time for their allies to respond. A common scenario when expert tier players attempt to practice strategic callouts like this is that player A will make a callout that they are going to push and then immediately push. By the time their ally, player B, is able to respond, player A has already committed to the push and then dies because they pushed alone. To make the situation worse, player B then comes rushing in to try to catch up, but also ends up dying. Consider another example of player A making a callout like, I'm blocking the tunnel with my grenade. This callout informs their allies that the enemies will not be able to push through the tunnel for a brief period. Player B might respond with, hold off on the grenade, I'm not in position yet. Player A then waits until player B confirms that they will be able to take advantage of the blocked path before casting their grenade. Another example is player A making a callout like, I'm in scope watching Bravo. This callout informs their allies that they don't have a radar active, and it is the responsibility of their allies to give player A information about enemies pinging on the radar. Player B can then later respond with something like, enemies pushing Alpha, get out of scope, to inform player A that they need to check their radar and reposition. Strategic callouts are not limited to the examples I'm providing here, but hopefully these examples will provide a clearer picture of the intent of strategic callouts and how pro tier players are able to coordinate so effectively. The key point is that pro tier players' callouts provide more information than simply where the enemy is. The callouts are made without interrupting their allies, and the callouts are made in advance such that allies can respond. In summary, individual skill level contributes to moving from casual gamer to dedicated gamer to obsessed gamer. After that, the quality of callouts contribute to moving through the final ranks from expert to pro. It's worth noting that this is just my perspective. If you talk to other people, they will likely have a different perspective on the characteristics of different skill tiers. But hopefully, my perspective will give you insight into what I'm looking for in a Trials team. Now, let's get into the details of what I want in my Trials teammates. The most important requirement is that I'm looking for people who are motivated to improve. If you are satisfied with your current abilities, you probably aren't a good fit for the team I'm trying to build. A key property of my team is going to be practicing, and if you think you're already a perfect player, there isn't much of a reason for you to practice with us. Individual skill is also important. If you struggle to aim and hold your own in one-on-one engagements, then you probably need to take some time to develop more. I'm still happy to play with you casually, but you likely won't have fun playing against the sweats in Trials. Another critical attribute of a Trials teammate is that you need to be calm. Trials is sweaty. Even when we are playing at our best, we will still lose matches. It's important to me that the people I'm playing with don't rage every time they die or blame the game for being unfair. The unfortunate reality is that many good players are hotheads, and while being overly emotional doesn't detract from their individual skill, it is deleterious to their team performance. Perhaps even more importantly, it's just not fun to play with people who get emotional and rage easily. Playing with emotional people is fine on occasion, but it's not something I want to be doing regularly. The squad temperament was important to me back when I was picking Halo 4 teams to play with, and it's still important to me today playing Destiny. I spent a significant chunk of this video talking about skill tiers, and specifically what callouts define players at the highest skill levels. Thus, it should be no surprise that I care about my teammates making quality callouts. I'm not expecting everybody, or even anybody, to be playing at a pro tier level. If I could get a team of players who play at the dedicated gamers level, I would be quite pleased. It is much more important to me that my teammates are motivated to improve and eventually get to an expert or pro tier level, but the starting point is less critical. My expectation is that we will spend a significant portion of our initial practice sessions going over specific maps and learning callouts for each map. After we learn the callouts, then I will start to expect people to use them effectively and slowly improve the quality of their callouts over time. The biggest deal breaker to me with respect to callouts is that I want all of my teammates to recognize the value of callouts. If you think callouts aren't for you because you can hold your own in an engagement, you probably aren't a good fit for the team. It follows that the next requirement is that I want players who think about the team instead of themselves or their stats. The only thing that matters at the end of the game is if we win or if we lose. As an example, a player who would rather stay back and protect their KD instead of pushing with an ally is not somebody I want on my Trials team. The next important characteristic follows from being a team player, and that is running a synergistic build. Specifically, I think that my allies should be running the Radiant Light, Powerful Friends, and High Energy Fire combo I mentioned in my previous video. Obviously, there would need to be exceptions, because at least Radiant Light hasn't been sold since I started playing Destiny, but the idea of using armor mods that complement and assist your allies is important to me. Finally, it may go without saying, but I expect that my teammates are available and interested in actually playing regularly. I'm not looking for another LFG type of team that only plays over the weekends. I want teammates that actually want to practice and get better together. As a reference point, my ideal schedule would look something like at least 3 to 4 dedicated playtimes where we are either practicing or competing in trials each week. This is roughly the schedule I had back in Foreigner Conflict. As a concrete example, I expect there would be one day midweek for inter-team scrims, assuming we have at least 6 players on the team. This would provide an opportunity to practice with and against competent players to share feedback and suggestions to improve. I would also like to have at least one casual night where we build camaraderie in a low-stress environment. Finally, I would like to have at least 2 trial sessions during the 4-day trials period each week. This is not a firm schedule, but what I think is necessary to get better while also balancing having fun. In summary, the most important attribute is that I want players who are interested in improving. I expect my teammates are at least able to hold their own in engagements, generally represented by a positive KD. I also want teammates with a reasonable temperament who are team players instead of focusing on themselves. I expect that everybody on the team is willing to do callouts and actively interested in improving the quality of their callouts. I'm also not attached to starting a brand new team. If you are currently on a team and this video speaks to your team's philosophy and you have an open spot, let me know and I'll definitely consider joining. This video is just a summary of what I'm looking for in teammates. If you made it this far in this video, I'm impressed. If you have thoughts or comments about my perspective, I'm curious to hear your feedback.